Waiter, I clearly ordered a Cabernet, not a standing statue. Terminate the Stratus deal right now.
Unaware, he owned the company signing their $1 billion deal. They poured wine on him in front of 200 guests, calling him unworthy. No one in that ballroom knew the man they mocked was the silent investor holding their entire future in his hands. Phones were already recording. The room was already turning. Something settled behind his eyes as he walked out without a word. Calm, unhurried, certain. And the collapse began before they even realized he'd left the building. Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you more stories where power moves quietly and justice lands clean. Now let's begin. You know that kind of night where everything glitters on the surface, but something rotten hides underneath the shine? That was the night Darius Cole walked into the grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel. He wore a navy suit. Clean lines, perfect fit, nothing loud. A simple watch. A neat fade. The kind of man that rooms like this learned to overlook because he didn't dress like he needed to be seen. He preferred it that way. Let them assume. Let them decide. By the time they figured out who he was, the decision would already be made. Crystal chandeliers threw light across white tablecloths set with precision. A string quartet played something polished that nobody actually listened to. Champagne moved. Perfume mixed with the smell of slow-roasted prime rib. Every phone in the room was out. Nobody wanted to miss proof they had been standing in this room tonight. And on every screen, one logo kept rotating. Stratus Capital Systems. Their $1 billion partnership with a mystery investor was the only conversation that mattered. Executives whispered about it by the bar. Board members bragged like they'd already cashed the check. The staff had been talking about it since noon. Darius moved through the crowd slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes reading faces. He had been stopped at the door already. The guard had looked him up and down and asked if he was with catering. Darius had smiled, shown his black invitation card with the silver seal, and walked through without another word. Inside, the same energy trailed him. Two women in champagne sequins caught sight of him and quietly shifted their clutches to the opposite arm as he passed. The small, unconscious gesture of people who have decided something without saying it. A man in a tux stepped in front of him at the bar. Staff goes first, right? Small laugh. Darius simply moved to the side and ordered water. No explanation. No correction. If tonight went the way he intended, none of that would be necessary. At the far end of the room, the host tapped the microphone and the chatter softened. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Stratus Capital Systems Gala. Applause rose like a conditioned reflex. Darius stayed near a marble column, close enough to see everything, far enough to disappear. Then she appeared. Celeste Vane stepped onto the stage in a sapphire blue gown that pulled every light in the room toward it. She moved like someone who had never once doubted whether she belonged anywhere. Her husband followed, Preston Vane, CEO of Stratus Capital, suit pressed sharp, smile rehearsed down to the angle. The room watched them with the kind of attention that money teaches people to expect. Everyone watched the Vanes. Everyone except the man who owned the deal they were celebrating. Darius Cole, standing quietly by his column, holding a glass of water, already deciding. The grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel had been built to make people feel small. That was the point. 40-foot ceilings pulled the eye upward toward chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen rain, each one throwing light across the room in a way that made everything below shimmer. The white tablecloths, the polished silverware, the champagne flutes catching gold as servers moved between tables like choreographed ghosts. Two women near the bar wore champagne sequins that flickered when they laughed, which was often and loud. They leaned into each other, scanning the room the way people do when they want to be seen doing it, deciding who mattered, who didn't, who was worth a second glance, and who wasn't worth the first. At precisely 8:15, the screens along the ballroom walls shifted in unison. The Stratus Capital Systems logo appeared, clean, angular, expensive, rotating slowly like a promise. The room responded the way money always responds to more money. A collective straightening of spines. a subtle sharpening of attention. Then Preston and Celeste Vane took the stage. Celeste moved first, the sapphire gown pulling every available light in the room toward her like the room had been designed specifically for this moment. She smiled the way people smile when they have never once been told no. Preston followed half a step behind. Tailored dark suit, easy confidence. The practiced look of a man who had spent years performing power, so consistently it had started to feel real. The applause was immediate. Reflex. The kind of approval that rooms like this give automatically to people who look like they already have everything. And, at the door, quietly, Darius Cole showed his black invitation card to the guard and stepped inside. Nobody looked up. Darius moved through the crowd the way water moves around stone, unhurried, finding the path of least resistance, disturbing nothing. He kept his hands loose at his sides, his pace measured, his expression unreadable. The champagne sequin women clocked him first. One glance, then the quiet shift, clutches sliding from one arm to the other as he passed. The small unconscious armor of people who have already made a judgment and aren't aware they've made it. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. At the bar, a man in a white dinner jacket stepped directly into the space Darius had been moving toward. Didn't look at him. Just filled the gap like he wasn't there. Then, almost as an afterthought, turned with a thin smile. Staff goes first, right? A small laugh. A dismissal dressed as a joke. Darius shifted one step to the left and ordered water. Behind him, two voices carried just loud enough. Is he with catering? Had to be. The service entrance is on the other side, though. A pause. Then softer. Who let him into VIP? He heard it. He let it pass through him. This was the texture of rooms like this. Not one large insult, but 100 small ones, each individually deniable, collectively deliberate. A language spoken fluently by people who had never needed to learn they were speaking it. Darius took his water and moved toward a column near the back of the room. He stood where the light was thin and the sight lines were long. From here, he could see everything. The stage, the screens, the crowd, the veins working the room like they owned it. They did, he supposed. For now, Preston Vane noticed him the way predators notice things, not with alarm, but with mild amusement. A slight tilt of the head, a word to someone nearby. Then he broke from the edge of the stage and walked over with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once approached a situation he didn't control. He stopped close, too close. The kind of proximity that wasn't accidental. Sir. The word landed like a hand on the shoulder before the hand actually arrived. Preston reached out and tapped Darius's sleeve. 2 fingers, the way you'd touch something you weren't sure was clean. Are you supposed to be standing here? Darius kept his voice even. I'm fine here. Just observing. Preston's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. He turned slightly, just enough to let the nearest cluster of guests feel included in what was happening. Observing. He repeated it like it was the punchline, then snapped his fingers at a passing server without looking at her. Can we get him a towel or something? Looks like he's sweating through that budget suit. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not laughter exactly. Something more careful than that. The shift of people recalibrating who they were watching and why. Darius said nothing. He held his water glass with the same easy grip he'd held it with all evening. His posture didn't change. His jaw didn't tighten. He simply looked at Preston Vane with the steady attention of someone who was gathering information rather than absorbing an insult. But something moved behind his eyes. Quiet. Specific. The way a door closes in a large house. Barely audible from the outside, but final. Preston mistook the silence for submission. That was his first mistake, and his last. Celeste arrived the way she did everything, on her own timing, making the moment wait for her. The sapphire gown caught the chandelier light as she crossed the floor, turning heads without asking for them. She lifted a wine glass from a passing server's tray without breaking stride, without acknowledgement, without a glance in the server's direction. The gesture of someone for whom other people's labor was simply part of the atmosphere. She stopped beside her husband and looked at Darius the way you look at something that has appeared in the wrong room. Sweetheart. The word was warm on the surface and nothing underneath. Her eyes moved over him slowly, top to bottom, the kind of assessment that had already reached its conclusion before it began. If you needed work tonight, there's a proper process for that. You can't just show up and pretend to be a guest. Darius said nothing. Her smile held, but only just. She extended the wine glass toward his chest, not quite a handoff, more a disposal. Take this to table 3. They've been waiting. The glass hovered between them. Darius didn't move. The smile faded in increments. First the warmth, then the performance of warmth, then the pretense that any of it had been real. What remained was something cooler and more honest. Her voice dropped half a register. Seriously? Do your job. Around them, the air had changed. Conversations nearby had softened into listening. 2 phones had already risen, subtle, angled, the quiet documentation of people who sensed something worth recording. The crowd had formed that particular stillness that gathers when a private thing becomes public and nobody wants to be the first to look away. Darius looked at Preston Vane with the same calm he'd carried all evening, and waited. Preston stepped in. He took the glass from Celeste's hand with the smooth efficiency of a man who had decided something and wanted an audience for it. He lifted it slowly, letting the moment breathe, letting the nearby guests register what was happening and lean in. His eyes moved across the watching faces with a satisfaction that didn't try to hide itself. "Allow me." He said it pleasantly. One less confused worker ruining the vibe. Then he tilted the glass forward. The red wine came in a single clean cascade, warm and immediate, hitting Darius's chest and spreading fast, soaking through the navy suit, climbing the collar, running in a thin line along his jaw. The smell of it rose sharp in the air between them. The gasp that moved through the room was involuntary. The sound a crowd makes when something crosses a line they didn't know was there until it was already gone. For half a second the ballroom held its breath. Then the phones came up. Dozens of them. Angled, steady, recording. Celeste laughed, a small, private sound she didn't bother to conceal. Now he knows where he stands. Darius stood completely still. Then, with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had already made every decision that mattered, he raised 2 fingers to his jaw and wiped the wine away. He looked down at his sleeve, straightened it, adjusted the cuff with the same care he might give it on an ordinary morning in front of an ordinary mirror. He did not look at Preston. He did not look at Celeste. He did not look at the phones or the watching faces or the room that had gone quiet around him. He simply turned and walked toward the exit. No words, no hesitation, no performance. Just a man leaving a room he had already decided to burn. The hallway was cooler than the ballroom, quieter, the kind of silence that feels deliberate after too much noise. Darius walked without hurrying, his footsteps steady on the marble, the faint smell of red wine still rising from his collar. Behind him, through the closed ballroom doors, he could hear the muffled continuation of the gala, music movement, the low hum of 200 people who hadn't yet understood what had just happened. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. 1 contact, 1 tap. It rang once. "Ready for instructions, sir." Darius kept walking. His voice was low and entirely level. The voice of someone dictating a grocery list rather than dismantling a billion-dollar partnership. Pull the offer. Lock every channel. Announce it now. Understood. He ended the call without another word and slipped the phone back into his pocket. 12 seconds. The whole thing had taken 12 seconds. His phone vibrated once as he reached the elevator. A message from the legal team. 2 words. Already done. The elevator doors opened and he stepped inside. The mirrored walls returned him to himself. The wine-dark stain spreading across his chest, the collar still damp, the cuff he had straightened with such precision back in the ballroom. He looked at his own reflection the way you look at a photograph of somewhere you used to be. Calm jaw, steady eyes, a man entirely at peace with what was already in motion. The doors opened to the lobby. He crossed it without stopping, nodded once at the valet who rushed forward, and stepped through the glass doors into the cold night air. Behind him, somewhere above, the music was still playing. It wouldn't be for long. The music stopped mid-phrase. Not a fade, not a pause. A cut, The kind that makes every head in a room turn at once because the silence arrives before the brain has finished processing that something has changed. The string quartet lowered their bows in unison, confused, looking at each other for an explanation none of them had. Then the screens flickered. The Stratus Capital Systems logo stuttered, pixelated at the edges, and went dark. Around the room, phones began lighting up in pockets and clutches. One, then three, then dozens, each one pulling its owner's face downward with an expression that moved through confusion and into something closer to alarm. My account access just got suspended. A voice near the bar, sharp and disbelieving. Same. Everything's frozen. Another, quieter, more frightened. Someone near the stage had pulled up a video. Short clip. 15 seconds. A man in a navy suit standing still while red wine soaked through his chest, then turning and walking out without a word. The caption underneath was already spreading faster than anyone in the room could track. Shared, reposted, duplicated across platforms in real time. The algorithm feeding it to exactly the kind of people who had money in Stratus Capital. Wait. A woman squinted at the screen. Isn't that the man they poured wine on? Earlier tonight. A board member moved through the crowd with the tight, purposeful walk of someone carrying information they wished they didn't have. He reached Preston and pulled him close, one hand on his arm, voice dropped to almost nothing. You need to understand what you've done. The investor behind this deal, the partner company, all of it, it belongs to him. A pause that lasted longer than it should have. Darius Cole. Preston didn't move. The room went silent in the way that only happens when everyone understands something terrible at exactly the same moment. The headlines arrived before sunrise. Not one or two, a wave of them, rolling across every platform in the language of financial catastrophe. Stratus Capital Systems, trending for all the wrong reasons. The clip looping endlessly alongside words like collapse, termination, humiliation, freefall. By 4 in the morning the story had moved beyond business news into something larger and less containable, the kind of coverage that feeds on itself because outrage and schadenfreude are the same algorithm. Preston was already awake. He hadn't slept. He moved between the window and the phone in a wrinkled shirt, hair undone, the polished certainty of the previous evening entirely gone. Every call he made ended the same way, a brief silence. Then a voice he recognized delivering words he couldn't argue with. We're out. Don't contact us again. We're out. Across the room, Celeste sat on the edge of the bed, still in last night's clothes. Mascara tracking down both cheeks in thin dark lines she hadn't bothered to wipe away. Her phone buzzed continuously against the duvet, a sound like something drowning, and she had stopped picking it up somewhere around 3 a.m. because the messages had stopped being questions and started being statements. The board had dissolved by morning. 2 senior partners had released a joint statement before 7. By 10, the share price had dropped to a number that made the business reporters use words they usually reserved for very different kinds of disasters. By noon, without speaking much to each other, Preston and Celeste got into the car. They drove away from the noise, away from the calls and the screens and the collapsing architecture of everything they had built, through quieter streets and quieter neighborhoods, until they reached the kind of block where nothing announces itself, where a man like Darius Cole could live without being seen. Darius opened the door on the first knock. He looked the way he had looked the night before, composed, unhurried, giving nothing away in his expression that he hadn't chosen to give. He studied them both for a moment without speaking. Preston, unshaven, shirt creased, the confidence entirely drained out of him, leaving something smaller behind. Celeste, eyes swollen, hands clasped in front of her like she wasn't sure what else to do with them. The morning light was honest in a way the ballroom chandelier had never been. Celeste spoke first. Her voice broke on the second word, and she let it. We were wrong. The way we treated you like you were nothing, like you didn't matter. She stopped. There was nothing to add that would help. Preston steadied himself with visible effort. Just give us a chance to fix this. Whatever it takes. We'll make it right. His voice had the shaky quality of a man accustomed to being heard suddenly uncertain whether his words had any weight left. Darius stepped to one side of the doorway. He did not invite them in. When he spoke, his voice was exactly what it had been all evening, soft, measured, carrying no heat whatsoever. You didn't lose everything today. You lost it the second you decided that people's worth came from your comfort. Celeste looked up. We didn't know who you were. That's the problem, Darius said. You didn't care. The silence that followed had no answer in it. He looked at them both one last time, not with anger, not with satisfaction, simply with the clear, steady attention of a man who had already moved on from a room he would never return to. Then he stepped back. The door closed. His life continued, quietly, and on his own terms, exactly as it always had. Theirs did not.